Well, hey, everybody, it's Friday night and it is quantum well-being. It's quantum well-being show, but it is quantum well-being. Is it quantum well-being in your world? I hope it is. I really do. I'm all about well-being. I mean, everything that I do is for the intention of increasing well-being. And that began way back in the 80s when I fell into the lap of Abraham, right? Abraham Hicks, in the hot seat, a crumpled mess. And it began way back then for me, and actually began further back, but I'll tell you more about that. But it's Friday night. You know that song, Friday Night? You don't want me to sing, Just Got Paid, right? You guys know that song? Do you know? Let me know if you know that song. All right. So tonight, a little bit different, right? You've been with me. Some of you have been with me for 5 years on the broadcast Team Alpha Show. You've been with me in, I don't know how long, how many weeks we've been doing this now, what, like 6, 7 weeks maybe. And, I'm an open book for good or for bad. Sometimes it's good for everybody else, but it's rough being an open book, right? Because if you are always in the process of wanting to reach a higher standard, become a better person, reach your intentions, it's really easy to look back at the last show and the show before that and go, oh my God, can we please just take that down? So I appreciate you for hanging out with me and letting me go through the movements here of finding my pace, of finding what really, really is an alchemical miracle between me and you and the shows and the network, and it's going to happen. So I just want to thank you for hanging out with me and being patient with me while that happens. I want to say a shout out to my friends over at the Conscious Awakening Network. I got something surprising coming up. Who did I just sound like? I almost sounded like Nanny McPhee there, right? Something surprising it's coming up over there. And I'm really excited. I'm going to be co-creating something with Sheila Seppi over there, and it's going to be fun, and I think you guys are going to like it. But you can also find our shows over there. Right now, you can even replay our shows over there, and we stream them live, Conscious Awakening Network, so go check it out. Hi, guys. I see you hanging out in the chat room. Got to do a disclaimer. If you're squeamish, if you get triggered by talking about the human anatomy, body parts, blood, or guts, or death, I'm going to talk about a lot of that, right? But I'm also going to, amid all of those other aspects that I told you I'm going to talk about, is going to be the fragility of life, the magic of connection, the absolute magic of connection, the courage and valiance of the human spirit and soul. And I'm going to talk about miracles that happen in the presence of love. Miracles always happen in the presence of love. So tonight I have a few experiences I want to share with you from when I was working in the burn and the trauma ICU that was lovingly known the BTU, the BTU. I knew I wanted to work there when I went through that unit during clinicals, right? When you're in nursing school, you get to hang out in the unit for a couple of weeks and see if you like it, see if you hate it, right? The psych unit, I triggered every psych patient that was in there. So I knew I did not want to go into psych nursing, right? So one psych patient was like, you put radon in the air vent. And I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. Psych nursing's not for me. I knew I wanted to work in the BTU, in the burn trauma unit. The minute I stepped foot in that unit, I just absolutely knew it. It was intense. It was a very messy place, probably even messier than the emergency room, if you could imagine that. The patients were often in very grave danger. I mean, wicked. 12-hour shifts would evaporate in what seemed like minutes. And the only thing you could really count on working in the BTU was that very little was predictable. So you had to be ready for anything. I remember one night I was taking care of a gang member, and for whatever reason, we didn't lock the unit. You know, oftentimes when we had gang members, we would lock the unit, but it was a night shift, and for whatever reason, we didn't lock the unit. And I remember standing in my patient's room, which of course was the first room. When you walk into the unit, it was the first room when you walk in the unit. I'm standing there for a minute, you know, thinking about how my night's going to go and planning, right, that if anything happened, that I would go in the bathroom, which was off, you know, the wall was here, the patient's room was here, the bathroom was off, you know, of course, in its own little room. And you never really want to go in a patient's bathroom because everything that needs to be thrown away gets thrown away in there. But my plan was, if anything happened, I would go in the bathroom and I would wedge myself between the toilet and the far wall. So that's what some of the nights were like there. But I absolutely loved every single minute of it. Oh, Linda said she's got a storm, so she may lose connection. Okay, babe. All right. So I knew I wanted to work there, but you can't just go and work there when you're a nursing student. You have to earn the right to work in that unit. You really do. You have to earn the right. So I went right out of nursing school. I went to the cardiac step-down unit, which most people don't go to that kind of a unit right out of school. Usually you start on med surge, you know, where just like the nice little old patients are and you work up. But I went right into the cardiac step-down unit because I knew after 1 year, I could go work at the burn trauma unit. And I swear it probably was 365 days to the minute that I went and I applied and I got in there. It was amazing. I loved what I did, guys. I absolutely loved it. It was fast paced. It was intense. There was so much to learn. I mean, so much. I'm thinking about having to know, right, advanced cardiac life support. That's not easy. You have to memorize every single drug for every single thing, including in case the person's dying of a spider bite. I mean, that is just one little snippet of the things you had to learn. There was so much to learn, and I loved every single bit of it. I loved microbiology. I loved everything about it. And I loved that there was always more to learn. We used to say that if the human pieces were living when the ambulance brought them in, right? The people came in through the emergency room in the trauma bay, and if they could kind of piece the pieces together enough to send them up to our unit, they usually would come up to the unit, then they would go to surgery, or they'd go to surgery first, and then if the pieces were still living, they would come to our unit. Sometimes we had such a high mortality rate during our peak season that we would joke, that we were going to put the sign for the morgue where the BTU sign is, because that's just the truth of what went on there. I loved it so much that I went in, I did my 3 shifts. They'd call me up and say, hey, can you do another shift? I'd be there. I mean, there were days that I didn't even know what day it was. The only reason I knew what day it was because we time taped the IV tubing, right? The unit was so vulnerable for growing all kinds of really crazy bacteria and viruses and things that we had to change the tubing out every day. That doesn't happen on every other unit, right? Because the other units are cleaner. So the only reason I knew what day it was some days is because I have to go in and go, okay, if today's Saturday, the time tape is yellow, and then I'd put the time tape on my new IV tubing, and that's how I knew what day it was. But I loved it. I loved everything about it. It was busy. There was all kinds of smart people, really smart people. It was a teaching hospital. So the residents would make rounds every morning with the doctors, and the unit director of the burn trauma unit, who was like, he traveled on a white beam of light, right? If I was in a car accident, I would only wish that I could utter his name. He was that amazing. So you kind of get in the picture, right? So every room has a nurse. The nurses usually had one or two patients, and most of the time, the acuity, our patients were so sick and so broken, we usually had one each. The setting was tons of equipment, and a copious amount of IV pumps, sometimes more IV pumps than one could think you could keep track of. But, you caught up by the adrenaline. You love the science, you want to make a difference. So you do it, and it's actually so much fun. And of course, I love the responsibility. I liked the responsibility of being a co-creative partner in whether the person could get better, right? If I could do my part and it was their part to get better, or I could do my part and it was their part to have a peaceful, dignified, loving death. I loved the responsibility of it, right? I loved when these patients would come in. I'm thinking of two in particular that seemed to not have a chance in hell, but they make it. So tonight I want to share a couple of experiences with you. And of course I was in the closet healer. I was literally in the closet healer because it wasn't cool. We didn't talk about being healers back then, and that'll be another story. I did do what I do. I did use my gifts when I was inspired to use them, and they made a difference. But that's another story. So I'm going to share a couple of experiences with you tonight, and I wasn't sure how to choose which ones because there's so many. I would love to share all of them with you. So I went back to my roots. As a little kid, I knew things. Excuse me. I didn't know that I knew things, right? I thought it was just normal. But then when I noticed the way that adults reacted to what I knew, then I began to understand that what I knew was something different than what everybody else knew. I knew when unexpected people were coming. I knew things that were going on with other people in my family, my aunts or my uncles that didn't live anywhere near us. And there was no logical way for me to know those things. I knew when there was going to be a car crash. I knew when someone was going to be hit by a truck. I knew when people in my family were going to die. I just knew. I knew a lot. And some of those things were not popular for a little kid to know. So I learned to stop telling people everything that I knew, right? But now, over the years, I've begun to develop, I've been developing this psychic aspect of my beingness. When I was 10 years old, I was handed a book. I still have the book. It is yellow. It is so frayed. I have it tied together, right? Tied together so gently. And it was, You Can Change Your Life Through Psychic Awareness. What a crazy book to give to a 10-year-old, right? But it was a gift beyond gifts, because the person that gave it to me knew that I was born into interesting circumstances and would probably need, right, the gifts of psychic awareness. But let me explain why. So I was adopted. And back then, when you're adopted, right, it's not all the niceties that they have now, like, underwater birth and somebody holds the baby. And right, I was probably in a plexiglass You're welcome. And thank you, for being the inspiration, for allowing me to share these stories tonight. So tonight I'm going to talk about Professor Vindicate. That's what I'm calling him. Professor Vindicate. Vindicate means to free someone from a wrongdoing, from the charge of a wrongdoing. Okay. So I want to say that right from the start before we get started. So Professor Vindicate came in. He was about, late 50s, early 60s. Can't remember what all was wrong with him. Pretty sure it was a pretty bad car wreck, and he was a mess. He was a mess inside. Had no family, couldn't contact anybody, couldn't find anybody, but he had a living will. And that living will said, this is what I want. This is what I don't want. He didn't want any of all the stuff that got done to him in the next 4 days. He didn't want any of it. The first day I took care of him, I always talked to my patients, even though they were brain dead, comatose, whatever you want to call it. Always talked to them, told them what was going on, told him what was wrong with his body. Of course, I never say, hey, you're going to die, right? Because I always leave hope open, because a miracle can happen, right? So there was this one doctor on that wasn't the usual doctors that I hang out with. Oh, you had no sound. Excellent. All right. I'm not sure where you guys lost the sound, but all right. So Professor Vindicate came in. He was a hot mess. Body was a mess. He wasn't going to live unless a miracle happened. The attending physician was not somebody that I usually work with, wasn't part of the usual crew, and was ordering all this stuff. I mean, all this stuff. And as nurses, we got to keep an eye on all this stuff, right? To make sure that it's necessary for insurance purposes, but also, of course, for the patient's purposes. So they're doing all of these heroic measures. They're doing all of this exotic testing and invasive, very invasive things. So the first day goes by. The next day I had him, I said, hey, doc, he's got this living will here. You seen it? You can tread lightly. Oh, yeah, I saw it. All right, well, is this, I'm treading very lightly. More orders, more invasive things, more testing, more exotic treatments. The third day comes. So then I was working night shift. So I'm talking to the patient. I'm like, look, there's a lot going on. I know, because you're in the middle of it. You're experiencing it. And I'm doing my best to advocate for you. He's comatose, right? Air quotes. But I'm having a really hard time. I'm having a really hard time advocating for you. So the third day comes and I talk to the doctor, and the end result of the conversation was, Nori, if you feel that you are emotionally involved with this patient, we could get you assigned to a different patient. Oh, my hair was on fire, right? It's like, okay. All right, so he's going to play that card. So I really thought about it. I prayed. I touched my patient. I shared energy with him. I let him know what was going on. And I said to him, look, I'm running out of options here. If you don't want all this that we're doing to you, I really suggest that you make a decision, that you make your own decision. So I get the ethics committee involved, right? Not a popular move, right? Not a popular move with this doctor, but I don't care. I had to take care of my patient. Got the ethics committee. They got involved. You do what they do. They do an investigation. But it was on the fourth day. I was working with him that night, and I said, look, here's what I did. And I laid it out for him. I told him everything that happened, told him about the ethics committee, told him that I am absolutely out of options, and that if you can make a decision and you don't want all this, like your living will says you don't, then I really invite you to make that decision. He was rock solid stable, right? The whole night. Vital signs were great, didn't waver a bit. Nothing would indicate that he was declining. I got off at 7:30, came back in that night at 7 p.m., and the nurse that I had turned the care over to told me that he coded, right? He went into cardiac arrest right around 7:45, and he died. There were absolutely no physical signs or symptoms that would have led to the belief that that was going to happen, except for him making that decision. I love that. I absolutely, that's one of my favorite proof of what power we have, that we are not just this body. Pixie, this is my show tonight. Thank you. That we are not just this body, and we have sovereignty over this body. Amazing, right? All right. I'm going to tell you one more quick one, and it's not a happy ending, but the power of connection, the sweetness, the power, the beauty, the majesty of connection is worth listening to the story. So we're in the BTU, right? The burn trauma unit, which means we get burn patients. So got a call from the ER. We're getting a burn patient in. It's going to be my patient. And she's a 22-year-old nail salon owner who had a 6-month-old baby and some other little kids, a family-run nail salon, who kept their acetone in a place where it shouldn't have been, and there was a cigarette or a match or something, and the only thing that was not burned on her was where she had a big belt, right? And, a big decorative belt in her clothing. That was the only part of her skin that was not burned. Not a good picture, not a good picture at all. Plus, she had inhaled flames. So she stayed with us for quite a while, right? I mean, we really tried to keep her alive. We tried to save her life. And burns are very messy. They're very dirty, and they're opportunistic. So things would begin to grow in the burns that would require, when it got so bad, things would have to be amputated so that it wouldn't continue growing. And we all got to know the 6-month-old baby. The family was amazing. They were Filipino. They were so sweet. Even on the saddest day, even on the most painful day for that family, they would bring us coffee or they would bring us donuts. I mean, they were just the give and the take in this particular case was so beautiful. So the nurses fell in love with the baby, right? So you would often find the baby back in the nurses' lounge, and she was losing body parts and she wasn't looking good, and her lungs were maxed out, right? Because she had inhaled the flames, and her vital signs were starting to show that she was definitely going to go soon. So we're all in the room, and we've maxed out every possible thing that we could do. We've got nothing left, and the baby's in the nurse's lounge with one of the nurses, so in love with the baby. And the family is around the bedside, and of course I would always stay with them. So I'm there with them, and they're praying and doing their personal ritual, holding hands, a beautiful, touching, heartfelt, very accepting. The family was very accepting of the fact that this 22-year-old girl was not going to hang around to raise her children, and be part of the family. And you could see the heart rate, right? You've all seen it on TV, get slower and slower and slower and slower. And I turned the alarm off because nobody wants to hear the flat line alarm, right? It's bad enough to be there with the patient, with your loved one dying. You don't need that horrible alarm. So I turned the alarm off. And as soon as she went flatline, and I told the family, the baby in the nurse's lounge started crying and became absolutely unconsolable. Mom flatlined, baby way down the hall in another room knew it. That is the beauty of life. That is the magic of connection. That is the grace of what we're here to experience, even though sometimes it's painful. That is proof that we are not separate. And I hope that this little story of not being separate inspires us all to look at the way that we look at separation right now. We think our family, we're separated from them. We think that we're separated from our boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, whoever we think that we're separated from. you're going to be separated from that person, right? I just really invite all of us tonight to think about that connection, right? To think about that spiritual, energetic connection, that we are not separate, and use it to create love and well-being somewhere, anywhere, in the grocery store, somewhere in your life. Much love, everybody. Please let me know if you want to hear more of these stories in the chat room. And I will see you. Ready for the countdown? Sunday night, I'm going to be there. Sunday night, 9 p.m. is the paranormal show. We've got Bill Me coming on. I'm going to be talking about Inner Earth. Woo, cool stuff. Okay, so that's Sunday. Tuesday, 8 p.m., our regular Broadcast Team Alpha show. And then Friday night, 7:30, it's only supposed to be a half hour. I made it 1 half hour even, is the Quantum Wellbeing Show. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mac. See you guys next time. Much love. Take care of each other.